when Josh sang, he sang, we speak so many languages, have different clothing, different colors, different names. But different is only dangerous when we forget that in the heart, we're all the same. Isn't it amazing how incredibly different we all are? And yet there's something in every one of us that knows that we are the same. What is that thing? Today marks 867 days of practicing Spanish on a language app. For all of those consecutive days, I have learned a little bit more about what it's like to try to communicate in a language that isn't my own. Y'all, it's hard. I have yet to be able to eavesdrop on someone's conversation in Spanish, which is really disappointing to me because I really want to know what they're saying. And I couldn't even have a conversation with them. I still need to see the words in writing, and I have to translate them in my head before I understand a sentence. So what's missing for me is the ability to interact with someone in Spanish. I'm still afraid to. I'm afraid to make a mistake. I'm afraid to be misunderstood. And so even though I may know about 4,000 Spanish words apparently, that's all they really are to me still. I haven't reached a point of comprehension and integration. So it just seems to me like we are just bombarded by words these days. I mean, if we're not listening to them, we're reading them, we're writing them, we're speaking them. It's just an inundation of communication. And it seems, though, that the more words we have, the less we understand. It's getting harder. Do you realize that there are actually more than 7,000 languages in the world? Some of them are only spoken by one person. English is the most widely spoken language, but did you know that only 25% of us learned it as our native language? That means that 75% of the people in the world who speak English learned it as a second language. That blows my mind. In trying to learn Spanish, the thought of somebody trying to learn English, and English is a bear. And I have a whole new respect for all of these people who have made this effort. So what's that like? I mean, what we take for granted as native speakers that others should be able to understand us. But what is it about having a native language that allows us to understand nuance and subtlety and jokes and all those things? That's the stuff of learning a second language that is really difficult. I can ask where the bathroom is, but I can't laugh at your joke about what people do in the bathroom. So the title of my talk is actually a play on this issue. The three words Mary, Mary, and Mary have distinctly different meanings, but they all sound the same. So imagine you're trying to learn English. So besides being the name Mary, besides being the name of Jesus' mother in the Christian Bible, who Josh will be singing about shortly, or Mary Magdalene, who was the only female disciple of Jesus, it can also mean bitter, it's a Hebrew meaning, beloved, rebellious, which refers in the Bible to Miriam's experience of being enslaved in Egypt, a wished-for child, or a drop of the sea. Then you take the word marry, M-A-R-R-Y, which means to combine or unite, the marriage of two things or people. And then there's Mary, M-E-R-R-Y, which, when talking about an occasion or season, means characterized by festivity and rejoicing, like the fun we had at my house on Friday night. That was Mary. Of course, another informal definition is slightly and good-humoredly drunk, which we were not, and that was really beautiful. So imagine, you're trying to learn English, and you have to understand the context of someone's speech when so many of our words sound the same. Have you ever seen those like memes online where they talk about the O-U-G-H and all the different ways we pronounce those letters? I'm so glad I speak English. But this is what it's like to learn a new way to think about the nature of the universe from a spiritual perspective. Many of us were taught particular meanings through our different religious or non-religious upbringings. And on this good morning, every word that is spoken up here today will be interpreted differently by every single person in this room. None of you will hear what I say or anybody else in the same way, because we are not the same. We have our own filters, we have our own contexts, we have our own experiences, and that's what happens. Have you ever played that telephone game where somebody says a sentence and says it to the next person and then the next person, and by the time it gets to the end, it's completely different? How does that happen? I mean, can you imagine that we're all trying to convey communication in the world, and it's not necessarily happening? That's the craziest thing. So this is how I've come to understand God, or the universe, or spirit, or whatever name you give it. It's all one power. It's the energy that communicates itself through each aspect of its created form. When I speak a word with specific intent, there's no guarantee that it will be understood in the way I meant it by someone else. I'm sure we've all had the experience of putting something in writing and having it be grossly misinterpreted according to what we intended. Why is that? Why? What is missing? I think what's missing is all the other aspects of communication that we take for granted. Communication is not just words. It's the physical expression of our bodies. It's our facial muscles. It's our eye contact. It's whether we are turning toward or turning away from. It's a gasp. It's a yawn. It's a hug, or any number of ways that we can communicate feeling. That's what's missing in writing, is feeling. But words themselves don't contain feeling. They're an attempt to influence a particular response in a reader or listener that is entirely dependent on their frame of reference and point of view. The different types of religious language have created their own language or jargon that is intended to inspire a particular response or reaction. These phrases or scriptures are assumed to have a specific meaning, but the truth is, as I said, there are no two of us who will interpret them in the same way. We can't. It's impossible. Therefore, anything that is spoken or written or told is only true to the degree that it is true for us. So how is it even possible for us to communicate at all? I think I may have mentioned to you that there are a bunch of kids on my street. There are 8 of them under the age of 6. And there is such a cacophony of laughter, screaming, crying, yelling every evening as they come out to hang out together in the street. And they like to come over to our house and fill up our driveway with chalk art. And I am always amazed that out of about 50 pieces of chalk, they all want to use the same one at the same time. There is some very intense communication whenever that happens. And but I'm so fascinated by listening to them develop the ability to use words to convey their feelings. They go from like grunting and pointing to actually being able to tell their moms how the other kids were mean to them. And now their favorite thing to do is yell, "Car!" and in order to help keep each other safe, because it's just kind of a It's a free-for-all out there. The parents are there. Yes, they are there. And it's safe. However, it's a little random sometimes. So one day, the little girl across the street, she's my baby friend. She just turned 4, and she was over at our house, and she came up to me with a little book she wanted me to read. She told me that the book was called How to Be Ellen's Best Friend. So when she handed me the book, I had to laugh because it was actually this little book. It's called How to Speak Science of Mind by Dennis Merritt Jones. And it's actually a cool little book. I got this when I first started coming here. This was way back, like almost 10 years ago. This was the thing you got for coming back the second time. So you got a Science of Mind magazine the first time, and then if you came twice, you got this little book. And it's actually very useful, and I am happy to leave it here, and y'all can look at it. But I love that how she had assigned that particular meaning to the words. I think she knew how to say how to read it, so she just made something up. And I thought, but then I thought, is that really how to be Ellen's best friend, to be able to speak science of mind? In practitioner training, we were actually encouraged not to use jargon. We were encouraged not to use we have our little phrases that kind of, they're sort of hints to each other, their code. Oh, you're a science of mind person too. We were encouraged not to do that. When we speak to someone about what we tend to believe here, the most powerful way to help them understand our language is to learn about theirs, to learn their background, to learn what their frame of reference is for how they interpret the world. What is their spiritual experience? What got them here? It's not about what I have to say to you. It's about what you have to say to me. Tell me. Let me help me understand what you need to know, because I can't know that. So Nelson Mandela advised, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. And St. Francis said, Lord, grant that I may seek rather to understand than to be understood. So this is, the powerful people who have changed the world understood that it was not about them. It was about everybody else. And so for us to each learn, this is why I decided to learn Spanish. I thought about doing so for many years, but never got around to it. I had the app on my phone for I think since 2009, something like that. And finally, I was like, I got to do this. And what actually pushed me forward was practitioner training. I started to understand that I need to be able to think differently. I need to think in the context of somebody else. I couldn't get frustrated with somebody for not knowing how to speak to me. I needed to be able to speak to them. And if I could do that, I could also help them learn my language. So I got a Spanish copy of Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements, and I read it side by side with my English copy. So I'd read the Spanish, and then I'd come over here and look at, okay, what did that actually mean? And it was super helpful. I began to read the Spanish communications from the home office at CSL. It's always bilingual, and I would read that. And it was so empowering to realize that I could understand the world from someone else's perspective in somebody else's language, even if I couldn't understand the nuances of the nearly 30 different dialects of Spanish alone. All the different countries, all the different Spanish-speaking countries have different languages. It's all Spanish, but not really. It's kind of like if you were in Kentucky or New England, good luck with that conversation. So this really has helped me put into perspective the nature of the principles of science of mind. And when we talk about speaking our capital W word, we're not so much talking about the word itself, but it's our meaning behind it. If I speak my word for abundance, for instance, I have to remember that the word doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. In fact, it can be triggering to someone who has not yet found a way to understand that it's a good thing when all they see is lack in their lives. Words can often be more of a hindrance than a help when there's a disagreement about their meaning. And that brings me to silence. Silence can convey more meaning than 1,000 words ever could. The song I sang said there is peace and release in silence, but there's so much more. When I worked in sales, can you believe I worked in sales? Well, maybe you can. I've gotten better, but I went into sales to help me talk to people because I didn't like to, and I thought, what would be the most unreasonable thing to do to learn to talk to people? And that's when I changed careers and started walking dogs instead. So in sales, one of the teachings in sales is that when you ask a customer for the order, you shut up, because the next person to speak owns the product. Meaning that the onus is on the customer to answer. You want them to sit there and just say yes. You want them to say yes, and they're probably going to say yes because they're so uncomfortable. So if I spoke first, I was dispelling that tension, and therefore they could easily say no. This also played out in my favorite movie. I love Good Will Hunting. It's such a good story, and it still resonates for me every time I watch it, which has been about 400 times now. In this movie, Matt Damon plays a troubled young man named Will. He's an orphan and spent most of his life in abusive foster homes. And he gets in trouble, he gets arrested. He is mandated to get treatment. So he's a genius. He is a mathematician beyond words. He has photographic memory. He can just whiz through a book. So he goes to several high-level therapists. This is Harvard. He's at Harvard and Boston. He's going to all the famous therapists, and they discard him. They say, I can't do anything for this guy. And so he finally ends up with a therapist named Sean, who is played by Robin Williams, who has a similar background. They're from the same neighborhood. Robin Williams is also brilliant. But he's teaching at a community college. I don't mean but, and he is teaching at a community college. When Will tries to manipulate him with his words and just nonsense, Sean, he's got his number. He knows what's going on. So one day, Will comes in for a session, and Sean says nothing to him. He sits there silently for 50 minutes, however long the session is, until the timer goes off, and not a single word has been exchanged during that time. When Will comes back for the next session, Sean does the same thing, says nothing. And it's Will who eventually breaks the silence. Sean knew that by waiting him out through the discomfort, he was taking away Will's ability to manipulate the situation. And that was ultimately the key to his breakthrough and healing. Silence contains nothing, and it contains everything. Maybe that's the truth of God It's the vastness of space that I experienced when I lay on my back in the middle of a frozen pond in freshly fallen snow. I just fell back into it. All I could see was the sky, and the absolute black sky and the stars. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything else. It was absolute silence. I've never felt more connected to the allness than I did in that moment. Silence, it's the moment of creation. It's an everlasting peace. It's the freedom of forgiveness. It's the sweetness of release. It's the joy of inspiration. It's the sunshine on your face. It's the birthright of all nations. It's the boundlessness of space. It's the beauty of a baby and the serenity of sleep. It's the anger we abandon, for it's love that's most deep. It's one power. The common language we all share contains no words. The common religion we practice contains no jargon. The common activity we engage in is our breath. And it is in that silence that there is peace. You take a moment with me to just sit in this silence, close your eyes, take a breath, and just be there. Thank you.